Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that unpacks complex topics using the source material itself.
That's right. We try to give you the clarity you need.
And today, wow, we're tackling something pretty fundamental. The connections between housing, inequality, and, well, public policy.
It's a big one. We've got some really interesting academic articles, plus a YouTube discussion
hmm
to help us really get into it.
Our mission, as always, is to synthesize this for you, our listener. We know you're curious, you want to learn efficiently, maybe get those aha moments without, getting overwhelmed.
Exactly. So we're aiming to build a clear picture of housing inequality from these different angles. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. Okay, first up, we have this article, Gentrification, Displacement, and the Role of Public Investment.
Right. And straight away, it makes a really important point. Gentrification and displacement, often linked, but not quite the same thing.
Yeah, explain that a bit.
Well, gentrification is more about the influx, higher income people moving in, physical changes to the neighborhood, new shops, that kind of thing. Displacement, though, that's about the existing residents. Are they being forced out? Or maybe moving because they have to, because things are changing so much?
Gotcha. So involuntary or responsive moves.
Precisely. And the article looks at why gentrifiers move in. It's not always simple.
Right, like lifestyle choices, wanting to live downtown.
Yeah, that's part of it. But also, interestingly, some political motivations, maybe seeking more integrated neighborhoods. And for the first wave, the so-called pioneers,
Ah, yes, the pioneers.
for them, it's often about affordability,
Hmm.
finding a place they can actually afford compared to other areas. They might not be super wealthy initially.
So it happens in waves.
That's how the article frames it. First, these maybe lower income, often artistic types, the pioneers. Then, as the area changes, becomes maybe cooler or more desirable.
Then come the higher income professionals.
Exactly. And look, gentrification can bring physical improvements, that's true.
hmm
Better buildings, maybe nicer streets. But it also drives up the cost of living. Rent, property taxes, even just the cost of groceries sometimes. And that's the link to displacement. Those very improvements can end up pushing the original folks out.
It's a real double-edged sword. The article also mentions something specific, Black gentrification.
Yes, that's a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah.
Black individuals or families moving into historically Black neighborhoods. The motivations there can be different, often tied to comfort, community, escaping discrimination faced elsewhere.
And maybe a sense of investing back into that community,
Yeah.
like racial uplift.
Exactly. It adds this whole other layer. It's not just about economics. It's deeply tied to history and identity. Really shows gentrification isn't monolithic.
No, definitely not. Okay, so that's gentrification. What about the history of displacement itself? The article touches on that too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
It gives some crucial U.S. context. Starts way back, mid-20th century, with things like urban renewal, highway construction.
Right, programs that often devastated existing communities, particularly communities of color.
Hugely disruptive. Then, the article says the focus kind of shifted in the 70s, maybe more towards private actions driving displacement, landlords, market forces.
Okay.
But now, the focus is swinging back again, looking at how public investment decisions today might be fueling displacement. It's come full circle, in a way.
Interesting. And how do they define displacement more formally?
They mention a key report from Greer and Greer back in '78. Their definition was really broad. It wasn't just landlords raising rent.
Who else?
It could be government actions, like code enforcement pushing people out, planning decisions. Even banks do things like redlining or denying loans. Lots of actors involved.
So it's complex and often not a straightforward eviction notice, is it?
No, exactly.
Yeah.
That's where this idea of responsive moves comes in. Desmond and Schallenberger's concept.
Responsive moves, meaning
Meaning people move because, well, conditions get too bad, the building's falling apart, or the rent just gets jacked up so high they can't stay.
so it looks voluntary on the surface.
But it's really a reaction to pressure. They don't have much choice. It really blurs that line between voluntary and involuntary.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got forced displacement, direct causes, and this responsive kind. Measuring it must be tough.
Oh, incredibly tough. Studies going back to the 70s have tried, but they use different methods, different definitions. It's hard to get a consistent picture scale.
And even defining gentrification seems tricky for research. Is it about who moves in or how the neighborhood changes?
Right. Both approaches have limitations. And a key point the article makes, focusing only on when gentrification is obvious might miss displacement that happens before that.
How so?
Like landlords anticipating future rent hikes might start clearing out tenants before the neighborhood officially looks gentrified. That early displacement is hard to capture.
Wow, okay. That's a really critical point. So the timing matters hugely.
Absolutely. Which actually leads us neatly into the next part, still from this article.
Yeah.
The role of public investment, especially transportation, like building new train lines.
Ah, okay, the infrastructure piece. How does that connect?
Well, the research here kind of splits into two streams. One looks at how transit affects real estate values nearby.
Right, like does living near a subway station make your apartment worth more?
Basically, yeah. Homes, rents, property values. The other stream tries to link transit investment directly to gentrification itself.
Okay, so what's the verdict on property values? Is there a transit premium?
Generally, yes. Most studies find a premium, but it varies a lot.
Depends on what?
Depends on the type of transit-heavy rail, like a subway usually has a bigger impact than, say, light rail or buses. Also depends heavily on the local market, what else is going on in that area.
Makes sense. Now, the more direct link, transit investment causing gentrification and displacement. What does the research say there?
That's where it gets fuzzier. The article points out conflicting results.
Why the conflict?
Partly those measurement issues we talked about, defining gentrification, tracking displacement accurately. It's just hard to pin down cause and effect definitively.
So no clear answer.
Well, some theories suggest it might even be deliberate, like a nexus of actors, developers, government, transit agencies coordinating these investments to encourage gentrification.
Whoa, okay, that's a strong claim. Is there evidence for that coordination?
The research is ongoing. Some studies look at who moves into new buildings near transit, these new build gentrifiers. Do they value transit access highly? Others look at the timing. Did the transit come before, during, or after gentrification started?
And what did they find in places like LA or San Francisco? The article mentioned a study there.
Right, that study did find a significant link between transit proximity and both gentrification and displacement in those cities.
Ah, so there is a connection.
Yes, and this is crucial, it really depended on when the transit was built and where it was located within the city. It wasn't automatic. Context matters.
So public investment meant to help people get around could actually push people out depending on the circumstances.
That seems to be the risk, yes. It raises big questions about how we plan these major projects to ensure they benefit everyone, especially existing residents, and don't just, accelerate inequality.
It's a real planning dilemma. Okay, that sets the stage nicely for our next source. Let's move to part 3, looking at the CEPR discussion paper, Housing and Inequality, a critical link in economic disparities.
Yeah, this paper offers a broader framework. It argues housing isn't just shelter, it's fundamental to how economic inequality works, how it's created and reinforced.
How does it frame that? What's the core idea?
It breaks housing down into 3 aspects: consumption, capital, and location.
Consumption, capital, location. Okay.
Right, so consumption is obvious. The quality of your housing reflects your standard of living, your wealth.
Sure.
Capital means housing as an asset, something you own that can grow in value. Maybe you can borrow against it.
Like building equity.
Exactly. And then location. This is maybe the most powerful one for inequality. Where you live determines so much. Access to good schools, jobs, healthcare, safety, social networks.
Right, your locational advantage.
Precisely. And the paper argues all 3 of these reflect existing inequality, but they also actively drive future inequality.
Okay, let's unpack that driving part. How does consumption drive inequality beyond just reflecting wealth?
Well, think long-term. Better housing often means healthier environments, less stress, which impacts well-being and productivity. But the location aspect is probably even more significant for driving future outcomes.
Because of schools and jobs.
Yes, access to quality education and good job markets heavily influences human capital development, social mobility. Basically, your life chances. Where you grow up matters.
And the capital aspect, owning a home.
For owners, it's a major wealth-building tool, leverage appreciation. But it's also risky, right? Markets go up and down, it's not liquid, and not everyone can access ownership.
So it creates a divide between owners and renters, too.
A huge divide. The paper connects this to the membership's theory of inequality.
Membership's scary.
The idea that where you live your membership in a place heavily influences your wages and skills, partly because moving to better locations isn't easy or free. Housing is the key that locks you into or out of certain memberships.
That's a powerful way to put it. Does the paper say anything about how housing returns vary, like as an investment?
Yeah, it notes big variations, not just between countries, but even within them. Maybe lower returns in big cities, perhaps due to risk or liquidity factors.
Lower returns in big cities. That seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's complex, but it also compares housing returns to, say, stock market returns, and that picture varies globally too. Higher housing returns in some parts of Europe, generally lower in the US and UK compared to equities.
Okay. And it brings up those neighborhood effects again.
Definitely. Access to good neighborhoods boosts upward mobility, but segregation, economic and racial, severely limits that access for many.
And things like evictions or foreclosures must hit harder for some groups.
Disproportionately impacts lower-income families, the paper stresses. Creates instability, disrupts lives, makes it even harder to climb the ladder.
So, given this whole picture, what policies does the CEPR paper suggest? What can be done?
It lays out a whole suite of ideas.
Yeah.
Things like expanding affordable housing, obviously.
More supply.
Right. But also rethinking tax policies,
Mm-hmm.
like mortgage interest deductions. Do they mainly benefit wealthier homeowners?
Good question.
Strengthening anti-discrimination enforcement. Reforming zoning laws, this is a big one, to allow more types of housing, more density, and providing better protections for renters.
Like preventing unfair evictions.
Exactly. A comprehensive approach, really.
Okay, comprehensive indeed. Let's switch gears slightly for part 4. We've got a Harvard Kennedy School paper, How Partisanship in Cities Influences Housing Policy. Politics enters the chat.
Yep. This one asks, does it matter if your mayor is a Democrat or a Republican when it comes to housing?
Okay, interesting question. What are they looking at specifically?
Two main things. First, do Democrats and Republicans just prefer different kinds of housing or neighborhoods? Is there a partisan split in public opinion?
And second,
Second, and maybe more directly relevant, does the party of the mayor actually lead to different policies being enacted? Does it change what gets built?
so does it? What's the headline finding?
The headline is pretty striking. Yeah, it seems to matter. Electing a Democrat as mayor is linked to an increase in multifamily housing construction.
Multifamily, so apartments, condos, more density.
Right. And they found this effect is even stronger in cities where the city council has less power to, like, veto or block the mayor's land use decisions.
Wow. So mayoral power combined with party affiliation makes a difference. Why? Does the paper explore the public opinion side too?
It does. It suggests there is a partisan divide in preferences. Democrats tend to favor smaller homes, closer together, more than Republicans do.
Any demographic links there?
Yeah, Democrats are also more likely to be renters and live in denser areas already. So, preferences might align with their own living situations.
Okay. What about reasons for that split in preference?
The paper floats a few ideas. Maybe historical racial segregation patterns play a role, different views on community diversity, or maybe differing opinions on the environmental benefits of density.
Could be any or all of those. And do mayors themselves express different priorities?
Seems so. The paper suggests Democratic mayors might lean more towards policies that increase density and help renters, while Republican mayors might focus more on promoting home ownership.
And there's even a political angle mentioned, right? Like multifamily housing might mean more Democratic voters.
The paper raises that possibility, yeah. It highlights how policy choices can potentially shape the future electorate. It even mentions some national political rhetoric, like Trump's comments about suburbs and multifamily housing.
Right. So how do mayors actually influence this? What tools do they have?
They have quite a few levers. Zoning is a big one. Appointing people to planning commissions, the whole process of issuing building permits, they can shape the development landscape quite a bit.
And how did the researchers isolate the effect of the mayor's party?
They used a clever statistical method called regression discontinuity. Basically, they looked at cities where mayoral elections were really close, comparing cities that just elected a Democrat versus those that just elected a Republican.
Ah, trying to compare otherwise similar cities where the only big difference was the election outcome.
Exactly. And doing that, they found that jump in multifamily permits after a Democrat wins. And again, especially when the council can't easily block it.
That's pretty convincing evidence for a causal link then. What's your take on it?
It really underscores that local politics isn't just symbolic. It can have tangible effects on the built environment, on the type of housing available. The why is still complex, but the correlation seems strong.
Now, the paper is careful to say multifamily permits don't automatically equal affordable housing, right?
Crucial point, yes. Building more market-rate apartments doesn't solve the affordability crisis overnight. But increasing the overall housing supply can help ease pressure on prices across the board in the longer run. More supply, even if it's not all designated affordable, generally helps affordability overall. It's basic economics, though complicated in practice.
Okay. Got it. So that covers the political angle. Now, for our last piece, part 5, we're looking at a YouTube video, The Political Economy of Housing, from Housing Court Answers.
But this one takes a step back, looks at the bigger picture, how housing functions within our economic system, almost like a commodity.
Commodity, okay. It starts by saying not all property is private.
Yeah, a reminder that we have public spaces, libraries, parks, and things like community land trusts, which operate differently. It challenges that default assumption that property, private profit engine.
And then it gets into this idea of housing commodification, treating housing like something to be bought and sold.
Exactly, and this creates a tension. Housing has use value. It's a home, shelter, security.
Right, the basic need.
But it also has exchange value. It's real estate and investment, something you trade for profit.
And the video argues that the landlord-tenant relationship is often caught in that tension.
Very much so. Use value versus exchange value is often at the heart of conflicts there.
The video also breaks down rent in interesting ways. It's not just covering costs.
No. There's economic rent, which comes just from owning a scarce resource like land in a desirable spot. And monopoly rent, maybe because a place is unique or supply is super tight.
So rent beyond just mortgage, taxes, and upkeep.
Way beyond. And it mentions different ways rent gets set. Social rent based on income, regulated rent, government controls, and market rent, supply and demand.
Okay. And what's this concept of financialization of housing? That sounds important.
It is. It's about how housing has become this financial asset class, bundled into mortgage-backed securities traded globally.
So detached from its actual use as a home?
Increasingly so, yeah.
Right.
Landlords or investors can profit not just from rent, but by increasing the property's paper value, refinancing, pulling equity out, often subsidized by the rents tenants are paying.
Wow. So tenants are funding financial plays in a sense.
That's the argument the video makes. It's another layer of profit extraction built on top of providing shelter.
And the video links this commodification to a lot of negative outcomes, right?
Oh, yeah. Bad conditions, because maybe maintenance eats into profits, rising rents, obviously, homelessness, landlord harassment to get lower-paying tenants out, disinvestment in areas deemed unprofitable, and gentrification itself.
It also brings in the history of racism in U.S. housing, doesn't it?
Absolutely critical point. It talks about redlining, urban renewal's impact, racial covenants, blockbusting, even violence, all creating and maintaining segregation.
And predatory exploitation, what does that refer to?
Targeting Black and brown communities specifically. Things like predatory deed sales, slumlords charging high rents for terrible conditions, putting affordable housing near polluting factories, subprime mortgage targeting, a whole range of exploitative practices.
And this ties into disinvestment too, like the Bronx example.
Yes. The video uses the Bronx bankruptcy crisis as an example of how disinvestment along racial lines happens, and crucially, how that disinvestment can then set the stage for later gentrification.
So there's a cycle. Investment, disinvestment, reinvestment.
That's the cycle the video describes. Initial investment builds things up, then disinvestment happens maybe due to policy, job losses, racism, the area declines.
And
Then, often decades later, comes reinvestment gentrification, because the rent gap is now huge.
the rent gap.
The difference between the low rents currently being collected in the disinvested area and the much higher rents developers could get after fixing up and attracting wealthier tenants, that gap is the profit motive.
Ah, okay. So disinvestment makes future reinvestment more profitable.
Exactly. Along with things like deregulation, financialization, economic growth concentrating in cities, it all fuels that reinvestment gentrification phase.
The video mentions stages of gentrification too, like pioneers, etc.
Briefly, yeah. Pioneer, early, mainstream, late gentrification. Potentially even hyper-gentrification or crisis. And it stresses the role of the state in all this.
How does the state fit in?
Through regulation, land use, policing, eviction processes, the state sets the rules of the game.
And the video argues the state often enables gentrification, using NYC examples.
It does. It points to things like weakening rent laws, upzoning for luxury buildings, tax breaks for developers like 421A, rezoning working-class neighborhoods.
Policies that help private developers capture the benefits of public investments, essentially.
That's the argument. Public money improves an area, policy changes let private actors reap the financial rewards, potentially displacing original residents.
And it talks about the coercive arm of the state, like housing court and evictions.
Right, highlighting that the legal system and law enforcement ultimately back up property rights and carry out evictions, which makes the fight for tenants' right to counsel so important, trying to level that playing field.
It gives examples of the state siding with landlords and tenants at different times.
Yeah, things like tax deductions for landlords versus right to counsel for tenants. It shows the state isn't monolithic either. Its actions can cut both ways depending on the policy and political context.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to cover from that video. It really paints a picture of housing as deeply political and economic.
Absolutely. So bringing all these threads together as we wrap up, it's just undeniable, isn't it? Housing is way more than just buildings.
Yeah, it's economics, politics, history, social justice, all tangled up.
And this interplay we've seen, public money, private interests, policy decisions, it shapes everything about our neighborhoods and who gets to live where, contributing massively to inequality.
It really does.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Considering all these forces, the market, the politics, the history, if you could make one policy change in your own community to improve housing equity, what do you think would have the biggest positive impact?
That's a tough question, but a really important one. There's clearly no single magic bullet.
Definitely not.
We really encourage you to keep thinking about these sources, look at how these issues play out where you live. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.